Hey everyone, Dave here in my 2010 Audi Q5. Got a message on the dashboard here that just popped up yesterday. I went out to a quick run to the store, and when I jumped in, I got this message. And there it is, alternator fault, battery is not being charged. And of course the battery in this thing is buried and not easy to get to, because I do want to put a meter across the terminals just to confirm that it in fact is not charging. So I hook my scanner up, and with the scanner hooked up, I look up in the corner here, and I've got 11.18 volts, 1122, which is low. That means it confirms that this thing is not being charged. So I've got a problem with the charging system. Let's pull it in the garage and investigate. All right, here we are in the garage. Let's take a peek and see if we can figure out where that alternator is. Oh my God. Not a whole lot of room here. Let me get some light in here. And there it is. Is that going to focus for us? There's the alternator pulley way down there. Got about 3 inches to work. So I think that's accessible from under the car. Hopefully. I'm going to jack the car up and let's see what kind of access we have from underneath. Okay, here I am under the car. There's the pulley for the alternator. There is the alternator. And the first thing I want to check is that big cable off the back of the alternator that goes to the battery. I checked that with a meter, and I got battery voltage there, so I know that wire is going back to the battery. I really don't suspect it being a wiring issue, but a couple little checks before I pull this alternator out, which looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Alright, so I do have a good battery cable going back to the battery from the alternator. Okay, first thing I want to do before I start tampering with the alternator is to disconnect the battery. And the battery is conveniently buried in the trunk. So, we got a bass speaker here. This has got to come out. There's a woofer. Spare tire. Comes out. This tray comes out, I guess. And here's the battery. Okay, that's not too bad. And I want to disconnect the negative terminal. It's got the big plus on it, so here's negative. You know, this thing's been clamped to that post for 12 years. If you leave it there, it'll just slowly kind of make its way back to the post over time. I don't want to be touching anything by the alternator when that thing makes connection. So I'll just leave that there. That's fine. Now I can go remove the alternator, and there's no voltage going to it. Okay, so now I've got no juice going to the alternator, so it's safe to touch anything here. And to get this thing off, we've got 4 bolts. One here, another one over on the other side, right there. So there's those 2 bolts. There's another 2 identical ones on the top side. We've got to take this serpentine belt off. And then we got to take this fastener off to get these transmission hoses out of the way so that this thing can come out in this direction. I mean, I'm on my back. I don't have a lot of room. This camera's very close to the work, so I can't pan out any further. But the alternator's got to come down the bottom here. So these hoses got to be moved out of the way. by removing that nut right there. These 4 bolts, one here, one there, 2 more up at the top. Take the belt off. So let me take those steps and then see if this thing will come out. I mean, I'd rather not have to disconnect these hoses. So let me try without opening up the system at all. But I'm going to start with removing this. Oh, and one other thing, this brace here for the front carrier has to come off. Looks like a Torx bit there, maybe a T25, and just a nut over here. So this bar comes off as well. So this bar, the bolt for these hoses, and 4 bolts on the alternator, and the belt. And then I should be able to hopefully sneak it through here. So let's see how this goes. Alright, so before I can start taking the 4 mounting bolts off of that alternator, I've got to take the belt off, or at least loosen the belt so there's no tension on it. And here's what I've done. There's a 17 millimeter bolt on the tensioner pulley, where if you get a socket on there and then you swing the socket, it swings the tensioner pulley to loosen the belt. So I've got my socket on that 17 millimeter. I've swung it all the way up out of the way, and then I've locked it in place with a little extension here. So now all the tension, there's a lot of tension on this pipe to go in this direction, but I've got that extension to lock it in place. So now the belt is loose, and what I'd like to try to do is just take the belt off of just the alternator so I don't have to fish it all around all of the other pulleys, because that can be a pain in the ass with very little space here. So I've got the tensioner pulley out of the way, the belt is loose. I'm going to see if I can't just get it off of the alternator pulley and have it stay on all the other pulleys. You know, I may have luck, I may not, but that's what I'm trying. Alright, so it's hard to get a video in here of what I'm doing while I'm doing it, but when I got the tension off of the serpentine belt, I was able to lift it right off of the alternator, and then I've tucked it right around, right behind that little standoff there. So the belt is on every other pulley, and it's just tucked right in behind that little standoff there to keep the belt in place. And so now I should be able to get this alternator out, and then when I get the new one back in, I will just grab that belt, unhook it from around there, and bring it back around the pulley, and then loosen the tension up top with that pipe locked in place with the extension. Okay, so I was able to get the 4 bolts off that hold this thing in place. And the setup that I used is this. We've got the 3/8 drive, a 6-inch and a 4-inch, and then a 13 millimeter wobble socket. So that's what I used, and I was able to, I mean, the 2 bottom ones were easy. The ones up in the back, I snuck back up in here with this, and I was able to reach it. You know, I had an impact wrench on it. You could just put a ratchet on there, and it really wasn't as bad as I was anticipating. But if you've got some kind of a setup like this or similar, and you can reach up in there and get it. They weren't on super tight. They came right out as soon as I got a good bite on them. Now I have to disconnect the wires to it and see if I can't get it out. But I can't film while I'm laying on my back here with my hands up here. You'll never see anything. Alright, I got it out. The 4 mounting bolts, a 13 millimeter battery cable, and a control connector. So it's 1 battery cable, 13 mil, a control wire connector. And I'm running out of battery with my light. But I did have to take off this hose here. One of these two hoses, I'm not even sure what they are. I just know that they're in my way. I don't know if it's an oil cooler going, motor oil going into the... I'm not sure what it is. I assumed that it was transmission fluid. But I did have to take this one hose apart so that I could get this hose out of the way. And then I got it out this cavity right here. A little tricky, but it wasn't as bad as it looked. Alright, so here's the alternator. Now I got it on the bench. 150 amps, VW, Audi Group. So I assume this is the original alternator, good quality alternator. I'm curious as to what the problem is. So I'm just going to investigate. I mean, the bearing sounds good. I don't know if this is a voltage regulator perhaps that maybe has gone bad, but I'm looking into it because these things are expensive. I mean, they could be like 300 bucks. Alright, I don't suppose I could do any damage because this thing doesn't work anyway. So let's see if we take it apart, if we can find something. Like I said, I don't know if this comes apart even. So I'm looking inside here and I see these spring-loaded brushes. And this one in the back, I'm wondering if that was just stopped making contact. Alright, I think what I'm going to try here is I'm going to get a new one of these regulators that's got new brushes in it, because those are all worn down, and I think that's the problem. They're just not making good contact. Okay, so I think my recommendation would be just to get a brand new alternator. Don't play with things. Just get a brand new alternator, install it in the vehicle, and be done with it. Again, this is a good quality alternator. It's very expensive. I'm going to go with plan B just because, I don't know, I'm cheap, or I believe what the problem is the voltage regulator has these two brushes inside here. They're spring-loaded brushes, and I just think they're worn so much. This one in the back barely protrudes out, and I think it's just worn to the point now where it doesn't make good contact with, I'm not sure the terminology of this. The rotor, perhaps. The stator is stationary and the rotor spins. So I cleaned up this shaft on the rotor, which is what these brushes make contact with, and I really believe that this is the problem. So I ordered one of these. It was like 40 bucks, and here it is. So I have a brand new one, and while I was waiting for this to come in, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to, depress these brushes to get it back in place, because the brushes will be sticking out. I need to get them pressed in. So I was trying to figure out how I'm going to do that, and when I got the new one, I can see how it was delivered to me. It's got this outside cap that's got two little windows that the brushes poke through, and this cap is kind of pushed back a little bit so that both the brushes are behind this cover and recessed beautifully. So I'll mount this in place, and then I will just push this cap down, snap it back into place, which will expose those brushes through the two little windows there, and I'll be in business. So now this fits on just like that, and once it's bolted in place, I'll just push down on this cap. Those brushes will pop through the two little windows in there. I don't know, can you see that? I need a light for you. There you go. You can see the two little brushes that are tucked behind this cap. Cap's got those two little windows. Once I push the cap back down in place, those brushes will pop right through those little windows and onto the rotor, and I'll be in business. So this is the route I'm taking, and maybe you can learn from this. If this works, great. If it doesn't work, you'll know. Don't bother trying it and just get yourself a new alternator. But I just believe, and I cleaned that rotor up quite a bit. So this is clean. It's got some wear on it. These two grooves are worn. This outside one is worn a bit, but I think there's plenty of material there that this is going to work. So this is the route I'm taking. Okay, this voltage regulator comes with new hardware. Okay, let me torque this down gently. They don't need to be cranked too hard. Okay, now I believe all I've got to do is push down this cap and those brushes will make contact just like that. Now, a smart thing to do at this point might be to bring this down to auto zone, and supposedly they can bench test it, put an electric motor on it, spin it, apply some voltage here, and then monitor the output. But I'm not going to waste an hour of my time doing that. So I'm just going to put this thing back in. Okay, so I'm sorry I can't get a video of me working under here, but like I said, I'm like the majority of you guys, I'm on my back. I don't have a two-post lift. So I'm working on my back, and there's just no room to be in here and work, and you're not going to see anything anyway. But, you know, I had this hose disconnected, which I was able to move this hose out of my way and get the alternator up into here. Going back in was very straightforward and pretty easy. Again, it mounts on 4 bolts. 1, 2 bolts here, and there's 2 bolts on the top. There's one of them, and there's another one right next to it. You know, a 10-inch extension with a wobble because you can't get a straight shot at it. There's a little bit of an angle. And I use all hand tools to get it back in. Simple ratchet. So 4 bolts. Let me get this back out here. 4 bolts. Reconnected this hose. Reconnected the hoses to the engine here. 1 battery cable to the back of the alternator. And then 1 connector. The one thing that I wasn't very happy about was that I broke that connector, I think, trying to fight with it to get it off, so it doesn't click in place. So what I've done is I just put a piece of stiff wire around it and then ran the wire and looped it through there. So there's tension, there's a slight tension on that connector, so it won't slide out because I broke the lock on it. But I think I'll be good with that. And now the belt is still loose. I just untucked it from, where was I? I untucked it from around this thing, put it back around the alternator, and now it's loose. Now I'm going to go up top and let's release that tensioner pulley that's spring loaded, and that belt will be back on. I didn't have to fight, and I didn't have to get it around all the idlers and all the air conditioners and everything, because there's very little room. So let's go up and release that belt tensioner, and we're almost done here. And I gotta tell you, it isn't nearly as bad as I thought when I first looked at it. Okay, so I'm back up top here. I've got my ratchet with this extender pipe on the tensioner pulley. I'm going to pull it back a little bit, and then I'm going to just pull out this extension that I had locking it in place. And so with the extension out, I can just let the spring tension take it back. And let me just make sure that the belt is on all these pulleys properly. And they seem to be. So that was a nice little trick to not have to reroute that whole belt everywhere. Alright, so the belt's back in place now. Okay, so I've gone in the back trunk and I've reconnected the battery. You know, I still got that front carrier brace and the whole belly pan to put on, but I want to make sure this thing's working before I put everything back together. But alternator's back in, wires are all hooked up to it, belt is on it and tight, and here comes the moment of truth. We're going to start it, and we're going to look at the battery voltage right there. So let's give this baby a start. Okay, and if we look down at the battery voltage, alright, 13.7, it's charging. Awesome. You see that, right? Yep. Anything up to 14 and a half volts. We don't want it to go over 14 volts. Alright, that's perfect. Alright, now we can go button everything up underneath. Okay, so here we are, 2010 Audi Q5, got about 170,000 miles on it. Gave me a message, battery not being charged, problem with the alternator. So pulled the alternator out. Really wasn't as bad of a job as it looked initially, with very limited room in there. We're able to get the alternator out. Instead of swapping the whole alternator out, which is very expensive, I went the route with, you know, I noticed that the voltage regulator looked like the brushes were kind of worn and maybe not making good contact. Instead of $350 for an alternator, I opted for the $40 voltage regulator. Replaced only that, put the original alternator back in the car, and started charging, no problems. So instead of $350, it was a $40 fix, a couple hours to do the job, and I'm happy with that. Anytime I can save $300, I'm thrilled. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that video. If so, please subscribe to the channel, and until next time, thanks for watching.